The bitter January wind howled through the streets of Montrose, Colorado, like a vengeful spirit, stinging Penelope Douglas's tear-streaked face as she stumbled through knee-deep snow. Her thin cotton dress offering no protection against the merciless winter of 1881. The door of the house she'd called home for 5 years had slammed behind her with such finality that even now, an hour into her desperate trek toward nowhere, she could still hear its echo in her mind. Snow crunched beneath Penelope's worn boots as she trudged forward, her body already beginning to surrender to the cold. At 26, she had never imagined her life would come to this, cast out like unwanted garbage by the man who had once vowed to cherish her until death. Harold's drunken rage still burned in her memory, his accusations of barrenness cutting deeper than any physical blow he had ever landed. 5 years and not a single child to show for it, he had roared, whiskey heavy on his breath. What good is a wife who can't give me sons? The snow was falling heavier now, large flakes clinging to Penelope's golden brown hair and eyelashes. Her fingers had lost all feeling, and her steps became increasingly unsteady. Montrose had disappeared behind her, and the vast expanse of white-covered wilderness stretched out in all directions. The setting sun cast long purple shadows across the snow, painting a beautiful but deadly scene. Penelope's vision began to blur, her thoughts becoming hazy. She knew enough about winter in the Colorado Territory to understand she was dying. The cold was a deceptive killer, first pain, then numbness, then a strange warmth that lured you to sleep, a sleep from which you would never wake. Part of her welcomed it, an end to the shame and pain of Harold's rejection. She stumbled once, twice, then fell to her knees. The snow felt almost soft beneath her, like a feather bed inviting her to rest. Penelope closed her eyes, a single tear freezing on her cheek. "Just a moment's rest," she whispered to the wind. "Just a moment." Miles away, Ethan Keller urged his sturdy bay gelding through the snowdrifts, cursing the delay that had kept him at the silver summit mine longer than he'd planned. At 32, Ethan had spent enough winters in the Colorado mountains to know better than to be caught out in a January storm, yet here he was, fighting his way back to his homestead as darkness fell. "Come on, Thunder," he urged his horse, leaning forward in the saddle. "Just a few more miles and we'll both be warm." The wind shifted suddenly, and Thunder tossed his head, nostrils flaring. Ethan frowned, knowing the horse had sensed something. Years of living in the wilderness had taught him to trust his mount's instincts. He pulled gently on the reins, scanning the white landscape. At first, he saw nothing, just endless snow and the dark silhouettes of pine trees. Then, as Thunder stamped impatiently, Ethan spotted an unusual shape in the snow about 50 yards to the east of the trail. It could have been a fallen branch or a rock, but something about it nagged at him. "Whoa, boy," he said, guiding Thunder toward the anomaly. As they drew closer, Ethan's heart began to pound. Not a branch, not a rock. A person face down in the snow, already half covered by the falling flakes. He dismounted quickly, boots sinking deep as he rushed to the motionless figure. Kneeling beside what he now recognized as a woman, Ethan gently turned her over. Her skin was pale as the snow itself, lips tinged with blue. For a moment, he thought he was too late, then he felt the faintest breath against his frost-numbed cheek. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" he called, brushing snow from her face. She was beautiful, even in her half-frozen state, delicate features framed by hair the color of autumn wheat. But beauty wouldn't keep her alive in this cold. Without hesitation, Ethan removed his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around her still form. He lifted her as carefully as if she were made of spun glass, surprised at how little she weighed, and managed to get her draped across Thunder's back. "Steady now, boy," he murmured to the horse. "We've got precious cargo." Taking the reins, Ethan led Thunder through the deepening snow, the woman secured across the saddle. His homestead was still a good mile away, and without his coat, the cold bit through his wool shirt and vest like fangs. But Ethan had survived worse, and something told him this woman deserved a fighting chance. By the time his cabin came into view, nestled against a stand of pines with smoke curling from the stone chimney, Ethan's entire body was shaking with cold. His ranch hand, Pete, must have kept the fire going, thank God. Ethan whistled sharply, and moments later the cabin door swung open, spilling warm light onto the snow. "Mr. Keller," Pete called, stepping out. The aging cowboy's eyes widened at the sight of Ethan leading Thunder with an unconscious woman across the saddle. "Good Lord! Help me get her inside," Ethan ordered through chattering teeth. "She's barely alive." Together, they carried Penelope into the cabin's warmth. The main room was rustic but comfortable, dominated by a large stone fireplace where flames danced merrily, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "Who is she?" Pete asked, clearing books from a small sofa near the fire. "Don't know," Ethan replied, laying her gently on the cushions. "Found her in the snow about a mile east. She's freezing to death." Pete, who had been with Ethan since he'd established the small cattle ranch 5 years earlier, nodded grimly. "I'll fetch more blankets." Ethan knelt beside the woman, assessing her condition with growing concern. Her dress was thin cotton, completely inadequate for winter, and now damp from melting snow. Her feet, though in boots, were likely frozen. He needed to warm her, and quickly, but he hesitated. What he needed to do might seem improper, but hypothermia didn't care about propriety. "Pete, I need to get these wet clothes off her," he said as the older man returned with an armful of woolen blankets. "Can you put some water on to heat, and then perhaps give us some privacy?" Pete nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll check on the stock then." Reckon they could use some extra feed in this weather. Once alone, Ethan worked efficiently, removing the woman's sodden dress and undergarments with as much respect as the situation allowed. He wrapped her in blankets, paying special attention to her hands and feet, which were alarmingly white. He'd seen frostbite before and feared she might lose some toes at least. As he worked, he spoke to her continuously, though she showed no signs of hearing him. "You're going to be all right, madam. You're safe now. I'm Ethan Keller, and this is my ranch. Not much to look at, but it's warm and dry." Once she was bundled in every blanket he owned, Ethan built up the fire until the room was almost uncomfortably hot. Then, remembering what he'd learned from an old mountain man years ago, he slid beneath the blankets himself, holding her cold body against his own warmth. It was dangerously intimate with a stranger, but it might save her life. "Sorry about this, madam," he murmured, feeling awkward despite the urgency. "Just trying to keep you alive." Hours passed. Pete returned, took one look at the situation, and quietly prepared a pot of strong coffee before retreating to his small room off the kitchen. Ethan remained by the fire, alternating between warming the woman with his body heat and gently rubbing her limbs to encourage blood flow. Sometime past midnight, she began to shiver violently, a good sign, meaning her body was fighting to warm itself. Dawn was breaking when Penelope finally opened her eyes. Disoriented and weak, she found herself staring at a rough-hewn wooden ceiling, wrapped in layers of blankets, with a strange man dozing in a chair beside her. Panic flared, and she tried to sit up, only to gasp at the pain that shot through her extremities. The sound woke Ethan instantly. His blue eyes, lined with exhaustion, met her terrified brown ones. "Easy," he said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. I found you in the snow yesterday evening." Penelope clutched the blankets tighter, suddenly aware of her nakedness beneath them. "My clothes," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They were soaked through," Ethan explained. "I had to remove them to warm you. I've been as respectful as possible, madam, I give you my word. There are some of my clothes laid out for you behind that screen when you're ready." He nodded toward a wooden folding screen in the corner. Memories began flooding back Harold's rage, the bitter cold, the strange peace that had come over her as she collapsed in the snow. She should be dead. This stranger had saved her life. "Thank you," she managed, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how to repay you." Ethan shook his head. "No need for that. Any decent person would have done the same." He stood, stretching his tall frame. "Think you can manage some broth? You need to warm from the inside, too." Penelope nodded, suddenly aware of a gnawing hunger. "Yes, please." "I'll step out. Give you a chance to dress. Just call when you're ready." True to his word, Ethan left immediately, giving Penelope privacy. Moving was agony. Her fingers and toes burned as circulation returned, and every muscle screamed in protest. But she managed to don the offered clothing, a soft flannel shirt and woolen trousers that were comically large on her slender frame. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs as best she could with her tender fingers. "I'm decent," she called, her voice still weak. Ethan returned with a steaming mug, followed by an older man carrying a tray with a bowl of broth and some bread. "This is Pete," Ethan introduced. "He helps me run the place." Pete tipped his hat. "Madam, good to see you awake, had us worried." "Thank you for your kindness," Penelope said, accepting the mug of what turned out to be strong, sweet coffee. Ethan pulled his chair closer. "If you don't mind me asking, what were you doing out there alone, in a storm, without proper winter clothes?" Penelope stared into her coffee, shame washing over her. How could she explain that her husband had thrown her out like garbage, that she had nowhere to go, no family to turn to? "My husband," she finally said, the words like gravel in her throat. "He decided he no longer wanted me." Ethan's expression darkened. "He put you out? In this weather?" Penelope nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "That's murder," Pete growled. "Plain and simple." "What's your name, madam?" Ethan asked, his voice gentler. Penelope Douglas," she hesitated. "Though I suppose I don't know if I still have a right to that name." "You have a right to live, Mrs. Douglas," Ethan said firmly. "And no man, husband or not, has the right to take that from you." He exchanged a look with Pete. "You're welcome to stay here until you've recovered. After that, we can help you get wherever you need to go." Penelope looked up, truly seeing her rescuer for the first time. Ethan Keller was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, though he didn't appear much older than 35. Most striking was the kindness in his expression, something she hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, the words barely audible. Ethan nodded as if he'd expected as much. "Then you stay here until you figure it out. No rush." Over the next few days, Penelope regained her strength slowly. The doctor from Montrose, summoned by Pete, confirmed she had suffered mild frostbite but would likely keep all her fingers and toes, a miracle, he called it. He also confirmed what she already knew, that returning to her husband would be signing her death warrant. Harold Douglas had a reputation in town, it seemed, and the doctor had treated Penelope for accidents too many times to believe this was anything but Harold's latest cruelty. Ethan offered Penelope the small bedroom that had once belonged to his mother, who had passed 2 winters prior. He and Pete shared the loft space above the main room. The arrangement was unconventional, but given the circumstances, propriety seemed less important than survival. As January gave way to February, Penelope began to find her place in the small household. She insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and mending tasks that both men were clearly grateful to relinquish. Her first attempts at biscuits were disastrous, having been raised in a wealthy St. Louis family with servants before her marriage, but she improved quickly. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Ethan broached the subject they'd all been avoiding. "Pete's heading into town tomorrow for supplies," he said, whittling a small piece of pine wood. "Thought you might want to send word to anyone who might be worried about you. Or, if you wanted to report what your husband did." Penelope set down her mending. "There's no one to notify. My parents died in a riverboat accident 4 years ago. I have no siblings." She twisted her wedding band, which she still wore out of habit. "As for Harold, reporting him would only enrage him further. He's a powerful man in Montrose." Ethan's hands stilled. "No man is above the law, Penelope." "Perhaps not in theory," she replied. "But the sheriff and Harold play cards together every Thursday, and the judge's daughter is married to Harold's brother." She sighed. "Besides, what would I report? That my husband threw me out. He would simply say I left of my own accord, and who would believe differently?" Pete, who had been quietly smoking his pipe, spoke up. "Folks might believe it if they knew you were expecting." Penelope and Ethan both turned to him in surprise. "What did you say?" Penelope asked. The older man shrugged. "Been watching you get sick every morning for the past week. My Eliza was the same way with all 4 of our children." His weathered face softened. "Figured you knew." Penelope's hand went instinctively to her stomach. She had attributed the nausea to her recovery, or perhaps the rich food after near starvation. But now that Pete mentioned it, other signs fell into place: her missed monthly courses, the tenderness in her breasts. I can't be," she whispered, though she knew it was possible. Harold had still claimed his husbandly rights, even as he berated her for her barrenness. Ethan's expression was unreadable. "If Pete's right, that changes things. Your husband threw out not just his wife, but his unborn child." Penelope felt tears threatening. All those years of praying for a baby, enduring Harold's accusations and abuse, and now that he had cast her out, she was carrying his child. The irony was too cruel. "He can never know," she said fiercely. "Never. He would take the baby from me, I know he would. Just to punish me." Ethan set aside his whittling and leaned forward, his face serious. "Penelope, listen to me. No one is going to take your child from you, not while I have breath in my body." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a promise, an understanding. In that moment, Penelope realized she trusted this man, this stranger who had saved her life, more than she had ever trusted the man she had married. February turned to March, and the snow began to retreat from the meadows surrounding Ethan's small ranch. With the warmer weather came increased activity: cattle to be tended, fences to be mended, preparations for spring calving. Ethan and Pete worked from dawn till dusk, and Penelope found herself worrying when they were late returning, especially Ethan. She hadn't meant for it to happen. It was foolish, dangerous even, to develop feelings for another man when she was still legally bound to Harold, and now carrying his child. But Ethan's quiet strength, his unwavering respect, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, all of it worked its way into her heart despite her best defenses. One evening, as she stood at the door watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan joined her, wiping his hands on a rag after finishing the evening chores. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he remarked, following her gaze. "Yes," she agreed. "I never really noticed sunsets before coming here. In town, the buildings block the view and—" She hesitated. "And Harold never allowed me to stand idly looking at the sky. Ethan's jaw tightened, as it always did at the mention of her husband. "Well, you can watch as many sunsets as you like here." Penelope turned to look at him. "I can't stay forever, Ethan, you know that." "Why not?" The question was simple, but his tone suggested layers of meaning. "Because I'm married," she replied. "Because I'm going to have a child. Because people will talk. Let them talk." Ethan took a step closer. "Penelope, I don't give a damn what anyone thinks. You deserve to be safe, to be happy. Your child deserves a home where it's wanted." "And what about you?" she asked softly. "What do you deserve?" Ethan's eyes, usually so clear and direct, flickered away. "I've made my peace with being alone. After Elizabeth died—" "Elizabeth, my wife," he explained. "She died of fever 6 years ago. We were only married a year." Penelope had wondered about Ethan's past, but hadn't wanted to pry. "I'm sorry," she said. "You must have loved her very much." "I did," he acknowledged, "but that's in the past. What matters is the here and now." He hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. "And right now, you and your baby are what matter to me." Penelope's heart raced at his touch, at the sincerity in his words. "Ethan, boss," Pete's voice interrupted whatever she might have said. The older man came hurrying around the corner of the house, looking troubled. "Riders coming. Looks like the sheriff and several others." Ethan's expression hardened. "Get inside, Penelope. Now." She obeyed, her mind racing. Had Harold discovered where she was? Was he coming to claim her, or worse, to harm Ethan for harboring his wife? Through the window, she watched as 5 riders approached Sheriff Collins, Harold's friend indeed, and 4 other men, including one she recognized with a sickening jolt as her husband. Even from a distance, she could see the fury in Harold's posture. Ethan stood his ground as the men dismounted. Penelope couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the tension in Ethan's shoulders, the aggressive stance of the sheriff. Then Harold stepped forward, jabbing a finger into Ethan's chest. Whatever Ethan said in response made Harold's face flush dark with anger. He swung wildly, aiming a punch at Ethan, who sidestepped easily. The sheriff intervened, separating the men while the others looked on with expressions ranging from amusement to disgust. After what seemed like an eternity, the group remounted and rode away, though Harold turned in his saddle to shout something back at Ethan. Only when they disappeared down the trail did Ethan return to the house, his face grim. "What happened?" Penelope asked as soon as he stepped through the door. "What did they want?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Your husband claims you've stolen from him, says you took family heirlooms before you left." "That's a lie," Penelope cried. "I took nothing but the clothes on my back, I know," Ethan said. "I told them as much." "But the sheriff says he has a duty to investigate any claim of theft. They wanted to search the house." "Did they?" Ethan shook his head. "I told them they'd need a proper warrant. Collins wasn't happy, but he knows the law well enough. They'll be back, though." Pete, who had been standing silently by the fireplace, spoke up. "They're just looking for an excuse, boss. Douglas wants his wife back, or he wants to make sure no one else has her." Penelope felt ill. "What are we going to do?" Ethan crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "We're going to fight, that's what. Harold Douglas doesn't get to throw you away and then decide he wants you back when it suits him." But as March progressed, the situation grew more tense. The sheriff returned with a warrant and searched the house, finding nothing, of course, but the message was clear. Harold wasn't giving up. Rumors spread through town that Ethan had seduced Penelope away from her husband, that she was living in sin at the Keller ranch. Then came the letter from a lawyer in Denver, stating that Harold Douglas was filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and abandonment. Attached was a demand that Penelope return all stolen property and vacate the Colorado territory immediately. "He's divorcing me," Penelope whispered, reading the letter for the 3rd time. They sat at the kitchen table, the morning light filtering through curtains she had made herself from flour sacks. After everything, he's the one filing for divorce. It's a manipulation, Ethan said. He knows the shame a divorce would bring you, especially on these grounds. He's hoping you'll come crawling back rather than face it. Penelope placed a protective hand over her slightly rounded belly. She was nearly 4 months along now, her condition becoming increasingly difficult to hide. He doesn't know about the baby. No, Ethan agreed. And if he did, he might change tactics entirely. They sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of the clock on the mantel the only sound. Finally, Penelope straightened her shoulders, a new resolve in her eyes. "I want the divorce," she said firmly. "Let him have it on whatever grounds he chooses. I don't care about the shame." Ethan studied her face. "Are you sure, once it's done, there's no going back?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied. "I don't want to be Penelope Douglas anymore." That woman was weak, afraid. She let a man destroy her spirit piece by piece. She took a deep breath. "I want to be someone new, someone stronger." The look Ethan gave her then was so full of admiration and something deeper that Penelope felt her cheeks flush. "You already are," he said simply. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly, Harold's influence ensuring that his version of events was accepted without question. Penelope did not contest anything, not even the scurrilous accusations against her character. By early April, she was legally no longer Mrs. Harold Douglas. The news spread through Montrose like wildfire, and with it came the social ostracism Penelope had expected. When she accompanied Pete to town for supplies, women crossed the street to avoid her, and storekeepers served her with tight-lipped disapproval. Only a few the doctor, the young widow who ran the millinery shop, the elderly couple at the general store showed her any kindness. But strangely, the rejection didn't wound her as deeply as she had feared. Each cold shoulder, each whispered comment behind her back, only strengthened her determination to create a new life for herself and her child. And through it all, Ethan and Pete stood by her, unwavering in their support. As spring blossomed across the Colorado landscape, so too did the connection between Penelope and Ethan. They never spoke directly of their growing feelings, but it was there in every glance, every accidental touch, every moment of comfortable silence as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the evening sky. One afternoon in late April, as Penelope hung laundry in the gentle breeze, she spotted Ethan returning early from the north pasture. His horse was at a gallop, unusual for the careful rancher, and alarm shot through her. "What is it?" she called as he reined in sharply at the hitching post. "Is it the cattle? Is Pete hurt?" Ethan dismounted quickly, his expression taut with anger. "Town's buzzing with news. Harold's engaged to be married to Sophia Matthews, the banker's daughter. Wedding's set for June." Penelope frowned, confused by his agitation. "Well, good for him, I suppose. Why does that have you riding in like the devil's on your heels?" "Because," Ethan said, stepping closer. "According to Pete's cousin who works at the bank, Harold's been boasting that once he's respectable again with a new wife, he's going to petition for custody of your baby." Penelope's hand flew to her stomach, now obviously rounded beneath her apron. "He can't, he wouldn't. He's claiming you're unfit," Ethan continued, his voice tight with restraint. "Living in sin, mentally unstable, unable to provide for a child." "But that's not true," Penelope cried. "None of it is true, I know that," Ethan said, taking her hands in his. "But Harold has money and influence. And the law tends to favor fathers in these matters." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. After everything she had endured, the thought of losing her child to Harold was unbearable. This baby was her future, her hope, the one good thing to come from her disastrous marriage. "I'll run," she whispered. "I'll go where he can't find me." Ethan's grip on her hands tightened. "No, there's another way." He took a deep breath. "Marry me." Penelope stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me," he repeated, more firmly this time. "As soon as possible, before the baby comes. If you're my wife, if I legally claim the child as mine, Harold will have a much harder time taking it from us." "Ethan, I can't ask you to, you're not asking. I'm offering." His blue eyes were intense, unwavering. "Penelope, this doesn't have to be. I mean, it can be in name only if that's what you want. But I promise you, no court will take a child from its mother in my home while I'm alive to prevent it." Penelope searched his face, looking for any sign of reluctance or sacrifice, but found only determination and something that made her heart beat faster. "Is this only about protecting the baby?" she asked softly. Ethan's expression softened. "You know it's not. I think you've known for a while how I feel about you, but I would never press you, never rush you, especially after what you've been through." "And how do you feel about me, Ethan Keller?" Her voice trembled slightly. He released her hands only to cup her face gently between his palms. "I love you, Penelope. I think I started falling for you that first morning you woke up and looked at me with those brave, beautiful eyes. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you hum when you're kneading bread. I love that you're carrying a child that I already think of as my own." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been so afraid to admit it, so afraid to trust these feelings, but I do. I love you." Ethan's smile was radiant as he lowered his face to hers, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so tender it made her knees weak. Unlike Harold's demanding, possessive kisses, Ethan's was an invitation, a promise, a shelter. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes, then? Will you marry me, Penelope?" "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Keller." They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Montrose. The ceremony was simple, held in their own home with only Pete, the doctor and his wife, and the elderly couple from the general store as witnesses. Penelope wore a dress of soft blue calico that she and the milliner had hastily altered to accommodate her growing belly. Ethan wore his Sunday suit, freshly pressed, with a wildflower in his lapel. The words they exchanged were the traditional ones, but as Ethan slid a ring onto Penelope's finger, his mother's band, simple gold with a small pearl, the look in his eyes spoke volumes more than any written vow could capture. This was no marriage of convenience, no mere legal strategy. This was a union of hearts, born in the most unlikely circumstances. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Ethan kissed her with such tender reverence that several of their guests dabbed at their eyes. Pete, who had never been one for sentimentality, cleared his throat gruffly and announced it was time for the wedding feast, a spread of roast chicken, fresh bread, spring vegetables, and a cake that Mrs. Petersham from the general store had insisted on baking herself. News of the marriage spread quickly through Montrose. The reactions were mixed. Some saw it as confirmation of the sordid affair they had already convicted Penelope of in the court of public opinion. Others, particularly those who knew Ethan's character, recognized a good man doing the honorable thing. A few, perhaps, suspected the truth that beneath the hasty ceremony lay a genuine love story, unexpected but no less real for its unusual beginnings. Harold's reaction, when it came, was swift and venomous. He stormed into the sheriff's office, demanding that Ethan be arrested for stealing his property, his wife, his unborn child. The sheriff, uncomfortable with the whole situation but aware of his own precarious position between Harold's influence and the law, explained that Penelope was no longer Harold's wife, and that without proof the child was his. There was nothing he could do. That evening, as Penelope and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset now as husband and wife Pete rode in with troubling news from town. "Douglas is on a rampage," the old cowboy reported, dismounting stiffly. "Been drinking since noon, threatening all kinds of things. Saying he'll burn this place to the ground, take back what's his." Ethan's arm tightened around Penelope's shoulders. "He's all talk." Pete shook his head. "Don't think so, boss. Not this time. He's gathered some men, Miller, the Renton brothers, that new fella from Texas. They were all liquored up, talking big about teaching you a lesson." Penelope felt cold fear grip her heart. "Ethan, maybe we should leave just for a while. Go to Denver or—" "No," Ethan said firmly. "This is our home. I won't be driven from it by threats." He stood, his expression resolute. "Pete, saddle up. Ride to the Carrington place and the Hollisters. Ask them to come and bring their rifles. I think it's time the good people of this county took a stand against Harold Douglas and his bullying." As Pete hurried to comply, Ethan turned to Penelope, taking her hands in his. "I won't let him hurt you or our baby, I promise you that." Penelope nodded, trusting him completely despite her fear. "I know, but Ethan, please be careful. I couldn't bear to lose you now." He kissed her gently. "You won't lose me. We've only just begun our story, Mrs. Keller." The name, her new name, brought a smile to her lips even in the midst of her worry. Mrs. Ethan Keller. It felt right in a way that Mrs. Harold Douglas never had. As darkness fell, neighbors began to arrive, not just the Carringtons and Hollisters, but others as well. Word had spread of Harold's threats, and these hard-working ranchers and farmers had decided enough was enough. For too long, Harold Douglas had used his money and connections to bully the community, to bend rules in his favor, to treat people as disposable. In standing up for Ethan and Penelope, they were standing up for themselves as well. By midnight, nearly 20 men were stationed around the Keller ranch, rifles ready, watching the road from town. Penelope, despite Ethan's insistence that she rest, remained awake, moving among the men with coffee and words of gratitude. These were people who had shunned her just weeks ago, yet now they stood ready to defend her. The realization brought tears to her eyes. It was near 2 in the morning when they heard the approaching riders, the thunder of hooves, raucous shouting, a shot fired into the air. Harold and his men, as Pete had warned, were coming to make good on their threats. "Get inside," Ethan told Penelope firmly, pressing a small revolver into her hands. "Lock the door. If anyone but me or Pete tries to enter, you use this. Understand?" She nodded, clutching the weapon. "Be careful," she whispered, kissing him quickly before retreating into the house. From the window, she watched as Ethan and the others positioned themselves strategically around the property. The approaching riders, she counted 8, reined in abruptly at the edge of the yard, clearly surprised to find not just Ethan but a small army waiting for them. Harold, unmistakable even in the dim light of a quarter moon, urged his horse forward. "Keller," he shouted, "come out and face me like a man." Ethan stepped into the clearing, rifle held loosely but ready. "I'm right here, Douglas, and as you can see, I'm not alone." Harold's laugh was ugly, slurred with liquor. "Hiding behind your friends. I always knew you were a coward," says the man who threw his wife out to die in a blizzard, Ethan replied calmly. "The man who now brings 7 others to fight his battle." A murmur ran through both groups of men. Even some of Harold's companions shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. "She's a thief and a whore," Harold spat. "And that's my child she's carrying." Ethan's voice remained steady, though Penelope could see the tension in his shoulders. "The child is mine, Douglas. My wife, my child, my home. You have no claim here." "Liar," Harold screamed, his control slipping. "Everyone knows she was still my wife when you took her in. Everyone knows that baby can't be yours." One of the neighbors, Sam Hollister, spoke up. "Don't matter none whose seed it is, Douglas. Ethan's claiming the child as his own, and the law respects that. The baby will have his name, his protection. That's the end of it." "Not while I'm breathing," Harold snarled, and before anyone could react, he drew his pistol and fired directly at Ethan. Chaos erupted. Ethan dove to the side, the bullet missing him by inches. Rifles raised on both sides, men shouting, horses rearing in panic. Penelope screamed from inside the house, pressing her hands against the window as if she could somehow reach through the glass to protect her husband. 2 more shots rang out, then 3 more in rapid succession. Someone cried out in pain. Through the confusion and gunsmoke, Penelope saw a figure fall from a horse, not Ethan, thank God, but one of Harold's men. "Hold your fire," Ethan's voice cut through the din. "Hold your fire, damn it." Gradually, the shooting stopped. In the silence that followed, Penelope could hear men breathing hard, a horse whinnying nervously, someone groaning in pain. "This ends now, Douglas," Ethan said, stepping forward once more. His shirt was torn at the shoulder and Penelope's heart seized at the sight of blood, but he stood tall and unwavering. "You've fired on unarmed men. You've threatened a woman and an unborn child. It's over." From the darkness beyond the yard came a new voice, Sheriff Collins, accompanied by several deputies. "What in God's name is happening here?" asked Douglas. Sam Hollister called. He came looking for trouble and found more than he bargained for. The sheriff surveyed the scene. Harold and his remaining men, surrounded by Ethan's neighbors, one man down and clutching his leg where a bullet had grazed him. "Douglas," the sheriff said, his tone resigned. "I warned you about this, told you to let it be." Harold's face was a mask of hatred. "She's mine, Collins. The woman, the baby, they belong to me." "No, Harold," Penelope said, stepping out onto the porch despite Ethan's earlier instructions. Her voice rang clear in the night air. "I was never yours, not really, not in the ways that matter. And this child," she rested a hand on her rounded belly, "this child will be raised with love, not ownership, something you could never understand." Harold's face contorted with rage. He raised his pistol again, aiming directly at Penelope. Several things happened at once. Ethan lunged toward Harold, the sheriff shouted a warning, and one of the deputies fired a single shot. Harold's pistol discharged harmlessly into the air as he toppled backward from his horse, blood blossoming on his chest. The ensuing moments were a blur. Men dismounted, rushing to Harold's side. The sheriff barked orders. Ethan sprinted to Penelope, wrapping her in his arms, shielding her from the sight of her former husband lying motionless on the ground. "Don't look," he murmured against her hair. "Just hold on to me. It's over now." But it wasn't quite over. Harold Douglas survived the deputy's bullet, though the doctor declared it a near thing. He was taken to Denver to recuperate and to face charges of attempted murder. His fiancée, the banker's daughter, promptly broke their engagement, unwilling to attach herself to a man whose reputation was now in tatters. As May turned to June, and Harold's influence in Montrose waned, life at the Keller ranch settled into a new rhythm. Penelope's pregnancy progressed well, her body growing rounder as her child their child, as she and Ethan both thought of it now prepared to enter the world. The scandal faded, as scandals do, replaced by newer gossip and concerns. Those who had shunned Penelope began to nod politely when she visited town. A few even stopped to congratulate her on her marriage and coming baby. The change wasn't universal, but it was enough to make Montrose feel less hostile, more like a place she might someday call home without reservation. One evening in early July, as the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Ethan and Penelope sat on their porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. Her time was drawing near. The baby could arrive any day now, and a peaceful anticipation had settled over the household. "What shall we name him?" Ethan asked, his hand gently caressing the swell of her belly where their child was particularly active that evening. "Him?" Penelope smiled. "Are you so certain it's a boy?" Ethan chuckled. "Just a feeling, but girl or boy, this child will be loved beyond measure. I've been thinking," Penelope said, placing her hand over his. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him James, after my father." "James Keller," Ethan tested the name. "Strong. Honest, I like it. And if it's a girl, perhaps Elizabeth, after your first wife. I know how much she meant to you," and Ethan turned to her, surprise and deep emotion in his eyes. "You would do that? Name our daughter after Elizabeth?" Penelope nodded. "She was part of your life, part of what made you the man I love. I wouldn't want to erase that." Ethan kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and gratitude. "Elizabeth Mary," he suggested when they parted. "Mary was my mother's name." "Perfect," Penelope agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Penelope felt a contentment she had never known before, not just happiness, which could be fleeting, but a deep-rooted peace, a sense of being exactly where she belonged. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. "After Harold, after everything. I believed that part of my life was over, that the best I could hope for was survival." Ethan tightened his arm around her. "You deserved so much better than what he gave you." "And I found it," she said simply. "Found you." 3 days later, in the pre-dawn hours of a clear summer morning, Penelope went into labor. The doctor was summoned from town, arriving just as the sun crested the eastern mountains. Ethan, pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door as Pete rode out to inform the neighbors, had never felt so helpless or so hopeful at the same time. The labor was long but uncomplicated, Penelope's strong spirit matching her body's determination to bring their child safely into the world. As afternoon faded toward evening, her cries of effort gave way to the unmistakable wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "Mr. Keller," the doctor called through the door, "you have a son." Ethan entered the bedroom with reverence, as if stepping into sacred space. And perhaps it was this room where pain had transformed into joy, where a new life had emerged into loving arms. Penelope sat propped against pillows, her face flushed and damp with sweat, her eyes alight with wonder as she gazed at the tiny bundle cradled against her breast. "Come meet your son," she whispered as Ethan approached. "James Ethan Keller." Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his heart so full he could barely breathe. The baby was perfect, a shock of dark hair, skin still flushed and wrinkled from birth, tiny fists clenched as if ready to take on the world. "He has your hair," Penelope said, smiling tiredly. "And your chin, I think." They both knew it wasn't biologically possible, yet somehow it seemed true. This child, conceived in one marriage but born into another, already resembled the man who had claimed him as his own. "He's beautiful," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "just like his mother." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything. For saving me that night, for giving us both a home, for loving us." Ethan leaned forward to kiss her forehead. "Loving you both is the easiest, most natural thing I've ever done, and the best." In the days and weeks that followed, their little family settled into a new routine centered around baby James. Neighbors visited bearing gifts and well wishes. Pete, gruff as ever, revealed a surprising tenderness with the infant, often volunteering to rock him so Penelope could rest. Even the townsfolk who had once whispered behind Penelope's back now stopped to admire the baby when they visited Montrose, exclaiming over his healthy lungs and Keller blue eyes. Word reached them, through the doctor's careful gossip, that Harold Douglas had left Colorado entirely, moving to San Francisco to start anew. He had signed papers relinquishing any claim to Penelope's child, perhaps recognizing that his vendetta had cost him nearly everything: his reputation, his engagement, his standing in the community. "You think he'll ever come back?" Penelope asked Ethan as they discussed the news. Ethan shook his head. "Even if he did, it wouldn't matter. You're not his wife. James is not his son. We've built something he can't touch." As summer turned to autumn, and baby James grew stronger and more alert with each passing day, the events of the previous winter began to feel like a distant dream or nightmare to Penelope. Sometimes, when she woke in the night to nurse her son, she would remember those hours alone in the snow, the cold seeping into her bones, the strange peace of surrender. How close she had come to death, how different her life would have been, or rather, would not have been. And then Ethan would stir beside her, reaching out instinctively to touch her even in sleep, and gratitude would wash over her like a warm wave. From the depths of winter, from the edge of death, she had found her way to this, a love she had never imagined possible. A family created not from obligation but from choice, a future bright with promise. On a crisp October day, as golden aspen leaves danced on the breeze and the mountains stood etched against a sky of perfect blue, Ethan and Penelope took baby James to a special spot by the creek that ran through their property. It was where Ethan had proposed, where they had often sat talking of dreams and plans, where they had first told Pete about the baby on the way. Spreading a blanket on the grass, they sat together, James gurgling happily as he discovered his own fingers. Ethan produced a small package from his pocket, wrapped in simple brown paper. "What's this?" Penelope asked, smiling as she accepted it. "Open it," Ethan urged. Inside was a small silver locket, intricately engraved with flowers and vines. When Penelope opened it, she found a tiny portrait of the three of them, a miniature the traveling photographer had painted when he passed through Montrose last month. "It's beautiful," she breathed, touching the image with a gentle finger. "Turn it over," Ethan said. On the back, engraved in flowing script, were the words, "From winter's cold to love's warm embrace, E and P forever." Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "Oh, Ethan, I wanted you to have something to remind you," he said, taking her hand, "that even the darkest, coldest moments can lead to something beautiful. That sometimes what seems like an ending is really a beginning." Penelope looked at her husband, this good, strong man who had found her in the snow, who had warmed her back to life in more ways than one, and at their son, cooing happily on the blanket between them. From the depths of winter, she had found her spring, her summer, her forever. "I don't need reminding," she said softly, leaning forward to kiss him, "but I'll treasure it always, just the same." As the years passed, the Keller ranch prospered. James grew into a sturdy, kind-hearted boy with his father's love for the land and his mother's gentle determination. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Elizabeth Mary, with golden brown hair and a laugh that could charm birds from the trees. And 3 years after that, twin boys, Samuel and William, completed their family. Montrose grew as well, the railroad bringing new faces and opportunities. Penelope, once shunned as a scandalous divorcee, became a respected member of the community, known for her compassionate heart and steadfast support of those in need, particularly women trapped in situations similar to what she had escaped. Harold Douglas never returned to Colorado. They heard, through occasional letters from acquaintances, that he had remarried in California, had children of his own, had found some measure of success in banking. Penelope wished him well from a distance, her heart free of the bitterness that had once threatened to consume her. On cold winter nights, when snow blanketed the land and wind howled around their sturdy home, Ethan and Penelope would sometimes tell their children the story of how they met, a simplified version, appropriate for young ears, about a cowboy who found a lady lost in the snow and brought her home to warm her back to life. "And then they fell in love," Elizabeth would prompt, knowing her favorite part was coming. "And then they fell in love," Penelope would confirm, her eyes meeting Ethan's across the room, the connection between them as strong and vital as it had been that first spring. Was it magic? Young Samuel would ask, ever the romantic despite his boyish ways. Ethan would smile, reaching to take Penelope's hand. "Something better than magic," he'd say. "It was real." And Penelope, surrounded by the family she had once thought impossible, would touch the silver locket that still hung around her neck, a reminder that from the darkest winter can come the warmest spring, that endings sometimes hide beginnings, and that love, true love, can warm even the coldest heart back to life.